What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Nicole Baer, a distinguished marketing executive with over 25 years of experience. Nicole's career includes leadership roles at renowned companies like Aon Hewitt, Zendesk, and Logitech. During her decade at Aon Hewitt, she climbed the ranks from a product marketing specialist to becoming the corporate VP and head of marketing for the talent group. At Logitech, she served as a chief operating officer and chief marketing officer for the Logitech Sports and Human Performance Group. In 2022, Nicole left Logitech to embark on a personal journey, taking a sabbatical to explore her passion for fitness and eventually establishing her own fitness coaching business. Recently, she returned to her marketing expertise, founding her marketing consultancy, Baer Consulting, following the success of her full-service marketing consulting firm, Artemis Marketing Partners, in which she founded in 2017. Nicole holds a bachelor's degree in English and American Literature from UC Santa Barbara and obtained her MBA from Berkeley's Haas School of Business 10 years later. Nicole, it is such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Carly. I'm thrilled to be here.
Of course. So, Nicole, set the scene for us. Where are you in the world? What's the situation looking like?
Yeah, so I've been on my official sabbatical for almost 9 months now. As I'm sure we're going to get into, for the reasons behind my sabbatical and sort of what I've been doing for the last 9 months, as you mentioned, I started a fitness business, which was great. It's been a side gig for a while, and doing athletic coaching, et cetera, really a passion of mine for many years that I've been able to kind of lean into during my sabbatical, but also recently launched a consulting business, Baer Consulting, and getting back into my marketing roots with my new business.
And by the way, I see 4 guitars behind you and a set of drums. So is this your passion? Are you a musician or is it the family?
I'm a little bit of a musician. Nowhere near the rest of my family. My husband is an incredible musician, plays multiple instruments. My oldest son plays bass guitar and my youngest son plays the drums. So amazing. I mostly sort of like play the tambourine alongside
the supporting role.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm exactly. But
I love that.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm at the level of skill that they're at. Yeah.
Okay, so what I love to do is I want to go all the way back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? And also, what type of child were you?
Yeah, so I was born in Santa Monica, so a SoCal kid, but we actually moved up to Northern California for our startups. So this is when startups were not startups as they are now. These were like bootstrapped, people who were really passionate in the early days of tech. So moved up here for a startup with my dad. And we lived in suburban Pleasanton, California, very much sort of that suburban lifestyle as a kid, a middle class, safe neighborhood, riding my bike, sports, academics, and kind of all of those classic California suburban things. And as I got older, I got a lot deeper into academics and sports.
And when you look at the person you are today, if you could pinpoint almost a person in your life that you think has inspired you the most from childhood, who do you attribute that to?
I would probably say my late father had a huge influence on me. Primarily the way that he had a fundamental respect for other people and decency that I think I carry into my own life, as an adult. And really viewing people as being worthy of respect, regardless of who they are. And that was very much a quality that he held. And I think I carry that forward.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you ultimately decided to study English and American literature, as I said in the intro, at UC Santa Barbara. So walk me through this time and almost choosing that major, right? Were you thinking of your career beyond? Did you even know about marketing back then, or what made you choose English?
I mean, I can be for all of the ways in which I'm very planful, and I set goals for myself, I can also be paradoxically kind of a one foot in front of the other type of person. And I think there's a little bit of a confidence factor in that. I feel confident in my ability to navigate a path. And so while I might hold an end in mind, I focus on what do I think is right for me right now also. So it's sort of holding those two things together. And that was very much what I did in terms of pursuing that degree. I was a voracious reader. I loved reading. I had very influential teachers when I was in high school, even going back to elementary school, who supported my love for reading, but also for analysis. And I discovered I had a little bit of a gift for analysis. And at the time that was in books, but as I sort of grew into my corporate career, that became analytics in a lot of different ways. But it really started, like, my passion for analytics, whether we're talking about marketing or sales, started with analytics for literature. And I really would go deep into, a literary crit on a book, for example. And I also found that I really loved the storytelling that's involved, as well as really getting kind of into the meaning of a particular piece of literature. And when I first started it, I wasn't quite sure where I was going to go with it. I just knew that I liked it and that I was good at it, which is actually not a bad starting place for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And as I went into it, I started thinking, okay, I do like this, but like, where exactly am I going with it? I was also working at the collegiate newspaper at the time and realized that I could have a career in journalism, because it's also an extension of analysis and questioning, which is one of the things that I had developed in my degree. And really kind of thought I was going to pursue this career in journalism. And then once I was really in there, discovered it can be a really tough life to be a journalist. I have a lot of respect for journalists, and instead looked at, well, what are sort of complementary careers to journalism or adjacent careers to journalism. And that was when I started to get into the world of public relations, because I realized as a journalist, I was talking to a lot of PR people. And so went straight from sort of English literature, journalism, and then went into PR, and then from PR into marketing.
And following, right after college, right? Like you said, PR and marketing. One thing that we talked about actually before recording this episode is the concept of, as an early professional, you sometimes think there could be two paths. On the one hand, I could think, go explore the world, go travel, find who you are, as people like to say, and then come back and start your career. On the other hand, it's like, you know what? I want to start my career now. There's value in starting your career now and working your ass off in a way, and then just kind of rising up there. It seems like you chose
the latter.
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah.
And working your butt off. And I wanted to almost get your thoughts on that. And how do you think about that now for early professionals coming out of college?
Yeah, so I definitely, and I know this can be a contrarian opinion, not afraid of those though. I do think your 20s are a time to grind. I think that doesn't mean it's in exclusion of having fun and traveling. In fact, I feel really fortunate that a lot of the more adventurous travel that I've done in my career was for work, and in my 20s. So if you can find the right opportunity, you can kind of get the best of both worlds, where you're grinding at work, but you're having the opportunity to adventure as part of work. I think that in your 20s, it's the time where you're laying a foundation for the rest of your career. And not to say that all people, but a lot of people also have more time and space in their 20s. When you get in your 30s, you start to, some people have a family, you have other priorities happening in your life. And your 20s are a time that you're setting a foundation. whether we realize it or not, we're kind of like puppies with a lot of energy in our 20s. And you can put that to work at work and build a foundation for success for the rest of your career.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I actually recently in my last episode, Sarah mentioned how in your 20s, she recommends going to a startup, right? It's very risky, but you have no
100%.
really other responsibilities. So I'm curious, when you were going into marketing and PR, what were you optimizing for in those first initial roles, right? What were you thinking, okay, this is the type of environment I want to be in?
Yes. I think first of all, and part of this is I kind of want to give permission to people in their 20s that there's an element of settling in to your job, right? For me as someone who tends to be a little bit fidgety, has a hard time sitting still for a long time, for example, learning how to settle into a rhythm of work was something that was a challenge for me. Like, how do I balance sort of like mental strain and being able to rest and recover, still having time to take care of my physical self, to take care of my relationships, my friendships, like finding that balancing point is something that I think we all need to give ourselves space to in our 20s, because if we can find the right habits and the right balance, that carries you into your 30s and beyond. So a lot of the early part of the very first years of my career was like, okay, how do I get myself grounded in this new way of life that I have as opposed to a college student? And so, sort of finding those rhythms, and also finding ways within the grind of the work that I did, because it can be grindy. Those early years, you're like, I am just, for example, PR, you're doing a lot of cold calls. You're calling a lot of publications, trying to get your product, your service, your client featured. It can be a grind, or you're doing a ton of research, et cetera. And I think being able to balance those sort of mundane things with having real challenges is a great balance. So you can take on those stretch projects, like seek out those stretch projects, seek out coaching, things that are going to challenge you in a different way than kind of the day-to-day grind. And I think that was really the first few years of my career, was finding, how do I get in a rhythm? How do I balance the mundane, grindy work with things that feel like they're stretching me and they're more aspirational? And I was very lucky to work for a woman, Sue Bola, early in my career, who supported coaching for all of her sort of up and coming talent. And that really helped me find my sea legs as eventually a manager and then an executive, with balancing out, okay, who do I want to be as a manager? Who do I want to be as a person, a leader, in a coaching setting? And that was a good balance for me in this sort of foundational grindy work that I was doing early in my 20s in PR and marketing.
Okay, I can go in a couple different directions here, but I want to focus on that one piece you said, where almost making sure you allow yourself enough time to find your groove. And I think we've actually strayed away from that in a bit. You've seen a lot of people tend to leave a company after a year or 2 years, and that's becoming the norm. Whereas looking back at your career, like I said, you were at Aon Hewitt, for example, for 10 years.
Yes.
And really, worked your way up to become a VP there. And so how do you almost think of that, for young professionals to say, what's the balance of staying there and making sure you're still learning versus, maybe it is time to completely switch roles or companies?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think at the company, so at Aon Hewitt, for example, I started off in more of a startup-y, smaller part of Aon Hewitt and sort of worked my way up the corporate food chain, as it were. And I was able to do that because I was at a company that had a lot of runway, right? Like, there were a lot of opportunities for me to grow. I took on progressively more remit. I created remit that wasn't there before to add value to the company, and also, supported my leadership goals by starting up things that were new and innovative within Aon Hewitt. And so I think some of it is doing a clear-eyed evaluation of where you're at, and is there the possibility for you to take on bigger roles, for you to create a bigger role for yourself, set new challenges? Do you have the support of management, of your leadership team to be able to do that? And I think that really should be the foundation of making a decision about whether to stay like I did at Aon Hewitt, because it sort of checked all of those boxes, or go somewhere else where you're going to be able to find those same dynamics of being able to take on more, broaden your skill set, or not. And I think that really should be what goes into decision making about whether you stay at a place or whether you leave. I would say that I think there's a lot of validity in both paths. I've seen people who got great experiences by going to a series of different companies and sort of finding their way that way. And I've also seen a lot of benefit to staying somewhere and being able to grow with that company. So, I don't think you make a bad choice as long as you're making it with the right sort of objectives in mind.
Yeah. And looking back at your experience at Aon Hewitt, kind of like what you said, rising up the ranks, how much almost self-advocacy did that take, or negotiation? What did that process look like? Because it sounds much easier, looking back saying, yes, I became this and this, but actually in the moment, it's scary too, especially as a woman in the workforce. Like, how did you navigate that?
For sure. And especially I was in sort of a twofer situation where it was a financial services company, which is Aon, and then a management consulting company, which is Hewitt. And so you sort of had the dual dynamics, especially for women, financial services company and management consulting. I think that what I would advocate strongly for women to do is, first of all, you have to say what you want. You have to say, I want more remit. I want more challenge, and put it out. You have to put it out not only to the universe, but to your boss and your boss's boss, and really raise your hand for those things and be prepared for the challenges that are going to come when you say you want them. The other thing is to say, I want this role. So when I was approaching I could see sort of partner in my sights at Aon Hewitt, I asked about a year ahead of when I knew the partner nomination process happened at Aon Hewitt. I said, I know we're a year out from partner nominations, and it's difficult to become a partner. There's a whole interview process. It's a multi-step process at Aon Hewitt. And I said, that's where I want to be. Please tell me what do I need to do to position myself now, not only for preparing for that process, but what are the kinds of accomplishments, remit, achievements that you're going to want to see in a partner in order for me to successfully make partner. And I think just that was impressive. So I to the people that are thinking about who are the next generation of partners, for you to say, I want to be a partner, tell me what I need to do, instead of just sort of passively hoping they're going to decide you should be a partner, is not only empowering, but it's a really good look.
Yeah. And I love that you said that also, just because I feel like it's so common for people to do that process, but all internally, right? Being like, okay, it's happening in a year. Let me prepare myself to become, a valid option and candidate for that position. But what you did is you actually went to them and you spoke up and you said it.
Yeah.
Do you have any almost very actionable tips, whether it's confidence, whether it's, making a list, whatever it may be? Do you have tips of going into that meeting? Because I feel like it's not easy.
Yeah, I think, in any conversation where you're raising your hand for something, you're saying, I want a bigger remit, I want a role, I want to hire, whatever it is. I think having something quantitative behind you to say, this is why I think I need this, I deserve this, as opposed to just saying you do, right? For me, before I went into that conversation, I did an assessment with myself about how do I stack up? And partners, for example, you're like, what are my performance metrics that justify me being a partner? In the sense of what have I contributed to this business that are going to be things that I would raise in a partner interview, for example, for what I've done. Also, do I have the vision for this? So some of it is looking backwards and saying, okay, this is what I've done really well. And this is my vision for where this team, this role, this business can go. And I have a vision, and I can articulate what that is. So I think it's a combination of having sort of that backward look, and then also having a forward vision that can be very powerful.
And you ultimately decided, and almost correct me if I'm wrong about the order of things, but you decided then to get an MBA. at Berkeley.
Uh-huh.
And one thing that's maybe unconventional is you actually did it 10 years post, undergrad at Santa Barbara. So walk me through that process. What made you decide, you know what, this is a good time for me to get an MBA? Did you have people being like, okay, Nicole, maybe you're too far in your career. What are you doing? Or how did you approach that?
Yeah. I completed it 10 years after I started my MBA, 6 or 7 years after.
Got it.
And the reason was that I had reached a point in my career where I realized that having some like classical training in some arenas like finance and operations, for example, were I'm not going to say they're skills that I lacked, because I don't like to look at it that way. More that, and especially I don't want to scare off liberal arts people either, because I think liberal arts degrees are fantastic. But it's more that I felt like for me to be a part of certain conversations that were happening at an operational level or an executive level, that I needed to have a really deep understanding of some of these areas that I had not studied. And someone who is a student by nature, and I'm someone who likes to speak from the authority of knowledge on something, I felt like I needed to go back and get some of that knowledge. And it's not to say that everyone needs to do that, but for me personally, I'm just the kind of individual that likes to really feel like I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about something. And so it felt important for me to go back and make sure that I understood, for example, microeconomics, and like really get that, and operations, and, the things that you're just not necessarily going to get on the job. So that was why I ended up going back, and it was the best decision I've ever made. And if anyone's considering getting an MBA as something that can kickstart your career, that can give you that knowledge, can also thwart imposter syndrome. An MBA can do a lot for you in that regard. And because for me, financially, it was important for me to keep working, I went back to business school part-time. And so that was actually great too, because I was with other working people. And so as a full-time MBA is great. And there's a lot of benefit to that in terms of building your network and being down in it. Like you are really deep in your MBA when you're getting it, especially a place like Berkeley, which has I think it's a top 3 business school. But the part-time piece was awesome because I was working with other working people. And so we had a certain viewpoint on what we were learning at business school that had practicalities that went straight into the work that we were doing. And I think that also helped accelerate my partner path, because the lights were really on with me around innovation, the discipline to run a business the right way. And that helped provide runway for me into becoming a partner.
And why do you think it helped, or how did it help deal with imposter syndrome, like you said? What aspects of your career have you seen it that you can almost attribute to your MBA? Yeah,
I think some of it, there's a couple of things. One is that when you're surrounded by really smart people like that at business school, you raise up to the challenge, right? And so you develop a sense in your ability to participate at high levels because you do it sort of day in and day out. You really challenge yourself. And so it's a little bit like strength training in reps. You're like, you're there, you're doing it, you're flexing those muscles around business so that you can have conversations with almost anyone, right? In any domain. And so that gives you a confidence that when you're in, for example, a leadership position and you're in meetings with the accounting people or finance or operations or legal, that you can talk to them from a perspective of like enough knowledge to be dangerous, as I like to say. And so that helps with imposter syndrome in the sense that those things are less intimidating. And so you feel like you have a basis for those conversations that you might not otherwise have. The other piece that I think is really important for me was that I was at Berkeley, which is a really incredible university, but high level of academic discipline and rigor. So you really raise your own game. But I also was one of the few women in the program, and you've just like a lot of women feel, you feel like, wow, I'm one of the few women here. and I want to represent, right? And that gives you the sense of, I'm going to override any imposter syndrome I have and bring my authentic self into this environment. And so it was a really powerful combination for me in kind of beating down imposter syndrome. Not that I've evaded it completely, because I think that's hard to do really for anybody. But I think any sort of inclination I would have had around imposter syndrome got significantly reduced by going to business school.
On that similar vein, right? You end up founding your own consulting firm. You go to Zendesk, you become the CMO of, a division at Logitech. Walk me through almost that experience of taking on these new roles, ultimately being able to be the chief marketing officer for Logitech sports division. What was that process like? What was going through your mind? And did you question your ability to fulfill that role?
Yeah. So sort of starting from the beginning, 10 years at a consulting firm is a little bit like osmosis. You start to feel like you can run a consulting company, even if it's not in the same domain, because I was in a completely different arena in Aon Hewitt. But I learned enough about what are sort of the operational requirements for running a consulting business? What are the right performance metrics? What are different operational models? What kinds of metrics are you looking to have in your first year, in your first 5 years, et cetera? And I also had developed a really great network by that point. And so I felt like I understand how to run a consulting business. I have a great network. I've got incredible connections. I've got a great connection through Haas, for example, with a lot of different folks. And I'm going to go jump 2 feet in, and I'm going to try this. I also think I have an entrepreneurial streak. And so it was really exciting for me, and especially if you come from a business school like Haas, which is very entrepreneurial focused, or Stanford, there are business schools that are more focused on entrepreneurial endeavors than others. I was like, this is the time. I'm going to do it. If I stay too long at Aon Hewitt, I'm sort of a lifer there. And not to say that's a bad thing, going back to the beginning of our conversation, but this is the right time for me to make a decision. And so I thought, I know how to run a consulting company. I have a great network. I have a great set of connections from Haas, and I want to try being an entrepreneur. And so I just jumped 2 feet in with Artemis. And there were a lot of interesting learning experiences with Artemis, which I am now taking into my new endeavor, Baer Consulting. And a lot of different learnings I had from doing that, I think, that are going to be invaluable for this second time around. But I learned a lot about being able to switch gears quickly, about what does it really mean to be in good service for clients. Got to sort of extend myself and my team into some different areas of marketing. And one of them was in really strongly in demand generation. And that was what engendered the opportunity with Zendesk.
Even before with Artemis, you decided to found it by yourself, right? Or did you have a partner?
No, I founded it by myself.
So how was that experience? Was there ever like a, oh shit moment of like, what am I doing? And maybe I should just go back to, finding a job in corporate world?
Oh yeah. I mean, the first time that you realize like how many, I found I was an S Corp. And once you realize how many regulatory filings you are, that is an oh shit moment where you're like, oh my God, there's a lot to do. And, so there were, I definitely had moments of feeling a little bit destabilized, but, sort of kept my head down, and tried to have confidence in myself that I would navigate things forward. And I did. And I ended up building an incredible team around me at Artemis. And I'm proud that a lot of what I did at Artemis was help women find on-ramps back into the workforce, those that had stepped away for parenting. And they were incredibly talented people who needed an on-ramp. And it's one of my proudest outcomes of that time was that I was able to help people who had the talent and needed and really wanted a way back in that would allow them to keep some balance in their life, to be able to have that kind of environment to work in. And that was the environment we had at Artemis that I hope to also have at Baer Consulting.
And I'm curious, as you've now gone through the process more than once of what it looks like to grow a team and hire people, and especially like you said, getting women kind of on the ramp again of coming back into the workforce.
Right.
What have you noticed that women, how they present themselves that you think needs work or improvement, or almost tips for women when they are entering, how they can present themselves?
I think that what can make women in that scenario, or any working parent, doesn't have to be a woman, it is to raise your hand. It kind of goes back to exactly what we were talking about earlier about me raising my hand and saying, I want a bigger job, I want to be a partner, these things. It's the same way in terms of creating on-ramps for yourself. You have to put yourself out there with people, with other women who are in the work world, other women that have companies, within the networks that you have, even the networks of other stay-at-home parents, to say, like, I am interested in returning back to the workforce, and I want to say that I'm available to do that and would love to have conversations. That is really the most important thing. Going back to something you said about like having things in your head. If you have that in your head, but you don't say it, how's the network of people that are there to support you going to be able to support you? And I think that's one of the things that I think that can often be overlooked, is we think, oh, it's posting to this board and it's this and all these sort of structural elements, as opposed to saying, how about starting with the network of people that want to support you and telling them what you want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And so for the years following, obviously you really honed in on marketing. And I want to know from you as an expert, what do you say makes an amazing marketer? Like, what are 3 top quality traits that needs to be in every marketing specialist, if you will?
I think you need to either be able to be, number one, a great storyteller, or be able to follow a story really well. So pick up a theme and carry it through into what you're doing, and really be able to get behind the story of what might be coming from your CMO, for example, for the story that we need to tell. That's a really important one. The other one is analytics. So completely the other side of the equation, like I was sort of talking about with my English degree, there's a lot of storytelling, but there's also getting under the hood, doing some analysis. And I think all modern marketers need to be able to be conversant in analytics, because we've got all the tools to do it. And as a marketer, the best standing you have when you're dealing with product people, sales, whomever it is when you've got data to talk about the story that you want to tell. The third thing I would say is to understand where marketing is on a continuum. So marketers can sometimes get inward focused on marketing, and they can get kind of like, well, we're in our own little land over here. We're not in our own little land in marketing. The adjacencies of product, for example, and sales are extremely important, and making sure that as a marketer, you're looking at the whole end-to-end spectrum of when the product is ideated to when the product is on market, and understanding that we're all one team that are making that journey successful together is something that's really important.
Sticking on the storytelling piece, how important is your audience, whether it's, the consumer of the end product versus even internally with your team? How does that come into play?
It's a great question. It's everything. It's everything. That's what we exist for as marketers, is for the audience, right? So That is our entire job, is to craft what is the story that we are telling to the audience that we have determined is the right audience, because it's not everybody, right? And that's where you can kind of fall down as a marketer, is to not be focused enough on who the audience truly is and understanding who the audience should be. That's also our job as marketers, is to determine who the audience should be for our product, services, solutions, and narrowing that down. Rather than thinking that what we're doing is all things to all people. It's not. And really understanding who the audience is and threading that through into every thought we have around how we are developing a product and presenting a product into market. Internally, I think I also can't underestimate or overestimate enough how important it is to make sure we're communicating what is happening in marketing to all the stakeholders that need to know. And I would define that pretty broadly, that I think most people in a company need to understand the story that we're telling in marketing, and marketers need to be able to communicate that internally in a way that others could even repeat. So, it's not just the external story, it's the internal story and how clearly we're able to articulate that.
Yeah. And are you able to test for people's ability of storytelling beforehand? For the hiring piece, even to test that they're able to actually carry on that message, like you said?
Yeah, I think yes. I think a lot of that gets into when you're interviewing marketers, understanding the work that they've done before and and their role in storytelling before, but also what's sort of their proof. What's their what's their CV look like that shows that they can tell a story or they can pick up a thread of a story and be able to pull that into their specific part of marketing. So like as an example, performance marketers who are working on digital ads and digital placements and telling those stories, how are they going to be able to pick up that story in their specific context as opposed to sort of broad storytelling? So their domain expertise in telling a story. And that's very different when we're talking about a product marketer versus a performance marketer, and the whole sort of spectrum that we have around marketing. It's how are you able to convey that story and understand the story that needs to be brought forward in your particular domain?
Yeah. Okay. Before we get on to the decision to take a sabbatical, as I know you did, and I'm so excited to learn more. But before that, you mentioned how a liberal arts degree can actually be very beneficial. And I'm even more curious now when you mention marketing, there's actually a huge analytical piece to it. And I think a lot of people who decide to pursue maybe that liberal arts side are scared or hesitant or don't even believe that they can even go into tech, right? And that's a whole umbrella in itself. How do you think through that? And almost what do you think about the possibility of making that transition into tech with that background?
Yeah. So I think if we think about what's really been innovative in the world, and what has needed stories to be told, it's been around technology for the last 20 years. That's where I think the most interesting. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I've been in tech my whole career, but that is where sort of the most interesting stories need to be told, and where I think the most creative people are too.
Right.
So I think bringing forth your creativity into tech as a liberal arts major is actually an incredible benefit to the industry, which has creative stories that need to be told. I think making sure that you're also balancing that storytelling with the ability to understand and consume analytics and data that help support better storytelling is something that's also important in tech. So being able to sort of hold both, unless you're going into, well, I shouldn't say unless, but if you're going to a purely creative career, you still need to have a sense of how you're going to use data in order to make some creative decisions. So it's really not exclusively one or the other. And I think that liberal arts majors are really doing themselves a disservice to think that there's somehow technology and what they do is a world apart from each other. That is completely untrue.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking that exact thing where it's almost a disservice to yourself if you think that you can almost go down that path without the analytics piece or without taking in data. So after Logitech, you ultimately decide to take a break. Walk me through that process. What went into your mind? And even more so, how were those first maybe 2 weeks or month of taking that break?
Yeah, so I hit my 25-year mark of working last October, so almost a year ago now. And for me, I'm someone who milestones give me pause. They just do. By nature, the fact that they're a milestone, I think about them. And I'd started to feel a little bit burnt out. I think like a lot of people had sort of post-COVID, you kind of got through with your head down and kind of picking your head back up and saying, okay, how am I feeling? And checking in. And that coincided with my 25-year anniversary. And also seeing my kids getting older. I have a new teenager. I have a sort of a mid-teenager. And realizing that this time was going to go really fast with them and that it was a good time for me to take a pause and reevaluate, what do I want my next 25 years to look like? And I felt like that was difficult to do when working full time. And it was a good moment for me to sort of pull back and say, I'm going to take a pause. And that was for me an act of real bravery. It was something that going into the unknown, because my comfort place is working. And so to actually take a break, even though it sounds like, oh, that's easy, taking a break. For me, that was very difficult. It was one of the harder things that I've done in my life, to be honest, to say like, I'm going to do something that's a little bit risky and take a pause on this sort of career that I've had that's been going like up, for a long time, and turning down, as part of that, turning down CMO roles and actually taking a step away and focusing on what my priorities were. So I would say, I did it. And then the first 2 weeks after I stepped away were like the best 2 weeks of my life of vacation. And I think people can relate to this who have been working for a while, which is even when you're on vacation, you still in the back of your mind, you're like, I know I'm going back to that big old pile of email, as much as you try to sort of shut work down, even when you're on vacation for 2 weeks, if you can do that, you still know you're going back. And for me, knowing I was not going back, I was, this was it. It felt like I was drinking, like I was like an incredibly thirsty person, like drinking from a fire hose. It was a pretty great feeling. And then I had a very strange reaction after that, was feeling like I really crashed out. And I'm fortunate that I got to work alongside Dr. Andrew Huberman when I was at Logitech. He was on our board of advisors for sports and human performance. And I had for some time been listening to his podcast about neuroscience and recognized that what was going on with me was really a dopamine crash. So I had been on this wheel of forward momentum for so long. And then when I stopped the wheel, my whole wiring kind of crashed. And as opposed to doing what I think a lot of people do, which is they run right back to work. I think this is part of why you see this dynamic of people quitting jobs, thinking they're going to take a sabbatical and they're back, like a month later, or people who retire and they bounce right back after retirement. I really challenged myself to stay with the feeling and kind of grit my teeth and say, you know what, I'm rewiring and I'm going to let myself rewire and give myself the time and space to see what happens if I get off this forward momentum. And some magical things happened. I've been able to meditate for the first time in my life regularly on a regular basis. My sleep has improved. I feel like sort of my emotional landscape is clearer than it has before. And it was giving myself that space to go through that crash and not try to immediately get back on a wheel that I think allowed me to be able to have these other things sort of magically show up.
How long would you say was that crash for? Is it, weeks? Is it, how long did you experience that? And almost what kept you powering through?
Yeah, I would say it was a solid 10 weeks.
Wow.
Maybe a little bit more, like a trimester of really sitting with discomfort. And as anyone who's either an athlete knows, that you have to be able to sit with discomfort, or you meditate for a long time, you have to be able to sit through discomfort. That was my mantra to myself, was stay with the discomfort. There's something that's going to come out of the other side of being able to be uncomfortable that is going to help you grow as a person. And so I just stuck with it. And then these other things showed up.
And walk me a little bit through those other things. Obviously, you entered this whole world of fitness. Obviously, you've been an athlete for years, but now you actually used it to almost help others. Walk me a little bit through that process.
Yeah. So I had a side gig really since the pandemic around fitness coaching and nutrition coaching, and really allowed myself to go fully into that arena in this space and see what is this world like of helping other people get more fit and healthy and creating a community of people who sweat together. And that's been really, really great, really interesting. It's allowed me to have time with my children in that capacity too, helping them meet their athletic goals, even my husband. But it also sort of told me that after getting through the discomfort and starting up this business that allowed me to express a different part of myself than I had before, it also sort of produced this feeling of not quite having enough intellectual stimulation. Not to say that what I was doing with fitness wasn't intellectually stimulating, just in a different way. But it made me realize that there's a specific type of intellectual stimulation, I think, that comes, especially for me, I think in marketing and go-to-market, where you're collaborating with people on things that are challenging and creative, and there's numbers involved, and there's sort of pure creativity involved. And there's a little bit of a magic in that I realized it was hard for me to replicate. And it didn't matter how many wonderful podcasts like yours I listened to, or books that I read, museums I went to, I couldn't quite replicate that feeling, that intellectual stimulation that I had at work, which sort of has brought me back into the world of consulting.
And you ultimately decided to, again, found your own consulting firm focused on maybe go-to-market, marketing.
Yep.
What made you decide, you know what, this is the right move, that this is the right time to do that?
Yeah, some of it was, in marketing, we have these terms inbound and outbound. Inbound means the things are coming into you, and outbound are the things you're sort of putting out. It was a combination of inbound and outbound, I would say. I was starting to have this feeling like I wanted this. I really missed my work, which is, right, by the way, a really wonderful outcome of a sabbatical. I mean, there can be a lot of wonderful outcomes of a sabbatical, but for me, recognizing that I loved my work was invaluable, because I don't think I would have necessarily gotten that if I hadn't had a little bit of distance. So there's a little bit of me having this feeling like maybe I want to return to this work that I actually do love, and also having inbound, I think, the universe sort of sending me people who are interested in having me do work for them. So it was a combination of what I was feeling within myself, and then the support that I was getting from other people that Right. They would love for me to consult for them. And the two together have created this new business.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, before we go to more fun questions, if you will.
Okay, sure.
I want to know, you said you worked with Andrew Huberman.
Yes.
If you could distill one tip or lesson or practice that you have almost instilled into your everyday, what would that be?
Oh man. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is the importance of breath work. That is something that I think we all can benefit from. And it's, I think the word like breath work has been something that's been considered to be kind of airy-fairy for a long time. And in fact, it's incredibly backed up by science. So things like physiological sighing, you could look up what that is. There are some things around breath work that are in his podcast and all sort of everything he sort of puts out there in the world that really prove that that's incredibly powerful for us. I think the second thing is sometimes being able to step a little bit away from ourselves to understand how our own biochemistry might be determining our thoughts and our behaviors. That, we can get kind of locked in our mind and think we're controlling everything. And, and these are, our thoughts are who we are. And that's actually not true. Oftentimes, I think there's a lot of biochemistry that is going on, for like the example that I gave around my dopamine crash, that if we can kind of look at objectively, we can also then be able to more rationally assess our own emotions.
Yeah, I love that. And also, especially as women with our cycles, like that comes into play a lot.
Yes.
And at what stage you are. So that's great. And then for breath work for you, is that something you do right when you wake up, when you go to sleep, at a stressful moment? When does that come into play for you?
So I do it right in the first thing in the morning, because
while you're lying down, or do you get up and it's a whole event?
It depends on my mood. Sometimes I will stay in bed. If I'm feeling lazy, I'm like, I'll just sit up in bed and that's fine. I do have a meditation pillow also that's in my bedroom. And so sometimes I'll just kind of go over there. Sometimes I go and sit in a quiet place in my house, whatever it is, but I've committed to doing it first thing when I wake up, because I feel like it really sets the tone for the rest of my day, how I interact with my children, my husband, my friends, the people that I work with. And so if I start my day off with a daily meditation, then it really superpowers the rest of my day.
Okay, Nicole, you mentioned earlier in this podcast episode that you love and you don't shy away from hot takes or contrarian opinions. So I want to know, what would you say is your almost most highest conviction yet contrarian opinion?
Well, we've talked about a couple of them, which is, grinding your 20s, not popular. I know the 20-year-olds are not going to love for me to,
it's a good one. It's
say that, but I think that it's true. I also would say that I think that if everyone in the world focused a little bit more on movement as being part of their everyday, we could change the world. And I know that that's also true for meditation. And I would say, like, if it's kind of a fill in the blank, what would change the world? I think meditation can change the world, but I also think movement can change the world. The simple act of moving ourselves every day, I think taps us into who we are as humans and gets us out of our heads. I think the more that we can feel our primal humanity and also sort of our inner animal that wants to move, whatever your spirit animal is or who you feel like you essentially are, we all need and want to move. And so I think that going from like everyone needs to exercise kind of perspective, I would say if everyone in the world focused on movement every day, I think we could live in a different world.
That's awesome. And Nicole, what would you say is your superpower?
I've been told that I have a natural ability for people to feel seen and validated. And I think that comes to me sort of naturally. And I think it's something that's a little bit of a quiet superpower, but perhaps a superpower.
I love that. That's amazing. Okay, Nicole, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you and learning from you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is @SheLeadsShow, and mine is @CarlyMalatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.